During your time at the waterfall, what, if any, conversation did you have with Miss Reed? I did not have any. Okay, this is too forceful and it indicates deception. He should have said, I didn't have any. Plain and simple, he's lying. On this date, did you have Miss Reed's cell phone information? He says, I did not. This unattracted denial indicates deception here. This is very important as we get to the next question. At the time that you were at the waterfall, he says no. Okay, that's forceful and direct. We learn objectively here that Higgins can lie with a direct no. But then we also get the luxury of a follow-on question here. You recall sending a text, and then Higgins says, oh, I'm sorry, can you repeat that question again? And then Lally says, oh, I know we've jumped around a couple of days. At this point, Higgins has had Miss Reed's contact information for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. It's not even possible that he could have not known this. But let's explore that route completely and say, maybe he forgot. Maybe he didn't understand the question. Maybe his time frame was messed up. It wasn't, because he says, I did not. If this was an honest accident, he would have said, I didn't have her contact information then. And then when he asked it again, he would have said, no, I didn't have it. And then when he says, oh, you didn't send a text, and then he would have been like, oh, you know what? You're right. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. There would have been a legitimate reason, but he didn't give any of that. He shows deception, and then he gets called out on it. He was trying to forcefully deny that, which means he doesn't want anyone to know that there's a relationship between him and Karen Reed, which means he's trying to hide it. You recall sending a text? Oh, yeah. And it's like Lally is trying to cover for him. He says, oh, I know we've jumped around a couple of days. That doesn't cover it. That's why he's off by a month. What was the substance of that text? I think it was something like, why had you sent that? To be honest with you, that's an indicator of sensitivity, not necessarily deception. That could be embarrassment. When we see that, we want to figure out, is this something that's embarrassing or is this something that is deceptive? So to be honest with you, it was I. Guess you could view it as a flirty text. He said I here. This is what makes this problematic. If he would have said, to be honest with you, I guess you could view it as a flirty text, then that would mean this is due to embarrassment of him flirting with Karen Reed. However, the I is deception, which means that the flirty text is deceptive. So to be honest with you becomes now an indicator of deception, not of embarrassment, because this is a lie. Now we have two indicators of deception, which means that the real reason for this is very important. The reason for the deception, if there's one indicator like I, could be here. But now that we have two indicators of deception, the reason for that lie becomes here. It's more important. This is all arbitrary, this scale. It's just more important than if there was one indicator. The real reason for the text was not flirting. The context also supports this. The context here implies that Reed and Higgins had discussed Reed breaking up with O'Keefe, and Higgins wanted to know what had happened. This also explains the sensitivity of the conversation between Higgins and O'Keefe earlier. Now that we have a couple of questions and we can see where the deception is amongst these questions, it becomes pretty clear that Reed and Higgins had a relationship, or the beginning of a relationship. We will find out later that Higgins didn't want to pursue a relationship with Reed until Reed ended the relationship with O'Keefe. I do think that they must have had a conversation that she was going to break up with O'Keefe. When somebody says, well, that is not flirty. There's nothing flirty about that. Well means what was the outcome. There's only one possible outcome he could have been looking for, right? He's not wondering if she got into grad school. The invitation to go back to Brian Albert's house, was that something that was extended to the entirety of the table? I took it as an open invitation to the people that were together at the table. Yes, he gives the answer at the end. Any time that Higgins puts a bunch of information before the answer, this is a deception tag. The repeating it and the repeating I indicate deception here. Higgins was aware that he was not invited to go back to Albert's house. So this is interesting. Higgins' baseline is very direct, and anytime he adds unimportant information before the answer, that answer turns out to be deceptive. Higgins doesn't put unimportant information before his answer. He just doesn't do that. As soon as he starts doing that, especially when you get an indicator of deception, it means this is very deceptive. Why is all of this important? This tells us that Higgins had something that he wanted to accomplish. This is not the type of thing where he's trying to be polite. He wasn't invited. There's a reason why he wants to go back there. Are you familiar with the address and where you were going? Did you know where you were going that night? And he says, I knew where I was going. Yes. Again, we have a statement before the yes. So that is extra information. And the way he says it, I knew where I was going. Yes. That tells you that he's a man on a mission. The question would have been sufficiently answered with just a yes, which would have fit Higgins' baseline. This tells me that he is expecting a confrontation with O'Keefe, and it's probably based on the conversation that he had with O'Keefe. It seems like he wants to hash something out, and I'm willing to bet that it has to do with Karen Reed. You drove from the waterfall to Fairview Road. How long a drive was that? Probably a few minutes. So that's it. He's done. There's nothing left to say on this. And then he says, but the weather was, you know this. I remember is a problematic statement. You can't say something you don't remember. So saying I remember is kind of like saying I was breathing. It's completely irrelevant. I know that you remember this if you're saying it. So when you say I remember, it's a good indicator that you're fabricating. I remember when I came out, I put the wipers on. There was some snow on the ground, but it was the type of snow where the roadway was still black at the time, but because it was being driven on, but the sidewalk had a light coating. This information is all extra information after the question was answered in full. This information plays a role in the event of the evening for Higgins. Higgins is talking about this because it's important to him. And if it's important to him, it's important to us. This is just an opinion. This could be due to trying to set the stage for people not seeing O'Keefe on the lawn, because the implication here is that O'Keefe would be covered in snow by that time. This seems to be misrepresenting the intensity of the snow at that time. He's really over-explaining. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines here of over-explanation. He's got the word because in here, which makes it sensitive. He's got I remember, which makes it sensitive and fabricated. Okay, so you mentioned that you beat Mr. Albert there. Is that correct? And he says, I did. I just put this in because I just don't want you to forget what his baseline is. He asks a direct question, he gets a direct answer. I did. It uses I, it's past tense, and it's active voice, all in 2 words. It doesn't take a lot to say a truthful statement. With regard to the home, what did you do when you got there? Well, I was kind of being a smartass, and I dropped the plow and I did a little sweep of the driveway. And then I got out of the driveway because I didn't want to get blocked in, and I parked. The reason Higgins got out of the driveway was not because he didn't want to get blocked in. The explanatory plus a negative statement makes that statement deceptive. It's a simple statement. So we have to figure out what's the deception here. Being a smartass? No, I think he's truthful on that. I dropped the plow, I did a little sweep of the driveway, and then I got out of the driveway because I didn't want to get blocked in. The lie is actually here. I did a little sweep of the driveway. How could that be a lie? Why would you lie about that? And the answer is the lie is in the time. I don't think that he actually did the sweep of the driveway before Higgins got there. You're probably thinking, of course he did. That's how the timeline goes. But that is not what the language is telling us here. So unless somebody else verifies this or he verifies this later, then we'll come back and look at this again. But something as big as a sweep of the driveway, if it's mentioned, it's important information. So we cannot disregard this no matter what. But we have a serious question mark here of the time because it's deceptive. I want to reinforce the fact that this is a very problematic statement. He's giving you a timeline and his language is telling you that he's giving you wrong, inaccurate information. Do you recall where you parked in relation to the house? So right off the bat with an explanatory, the back end of the gray Jeep would have been right around the mailbox itself, and the edge of the driveway is right there. I wanted to make sure that I was not blocking the driveway or blocked in. He restates the idea of not wanting to get blocked in. This indicates to me that he wants to ensure that everyone heard that answer and that it didn't get glossed over. That means that the answer is deceptive. We have the I, which means there's deception, that this what follows the I is deceptive. I wanted to make sure that I was not blocking the driveway or blocked in because this is deceptive, right? This is deceptive. That is a made up story. So let's go back up here real quick because I didn't want to get blocked in. Okay, that is deceptive and I parked. The deception that we see in this statement is either he didn't plow the driveway at this time or he plowed the driveway at this time for a reason, something that he's not willing to tell you, something that's omitted. So that would mean to destroy evidence or something like that. Because we know the timeline at this point that Reed and O'Keefe weren't there yet, it makes it highly unlikely that he was destroying evidence before anything happened. That means either the timeline is wrong or he's creating a wrong timeline here and that the sweep of the driveway didn't happen at this point. Let's keep that in mind. Either O'Keefe was there early somehow, or this statement is on the wrong timeline. So you arrived at the house, you did the maneuver with the plow in the driveway, then you parked the vehicle, and where is it that you go from there? And he says, into the house. There's no indication of time here. Into the house. There's no verb. This actually is a sentence fragment. This isn't even a sentence. When you get a sentence fragment that has no subject, no verb, into the house is a prepositional phrase. This is a nonsense statement that it actually doesn't mean anything. It doesn't even mean into the house because there's no person assigned to it or action, which means he's dodging this question. There is something to that. So you did the maneuver with the plow in the driveway, then you park the vehicle, and where is it that you go from there? He does not give you an answer to that. Where he goes from there is still a mystery that he's not willing to answer.
And when you get into the house, who, if anyone, is there, or who, if anyone, is coming in with you?
So I might have been there, well, it was about the same time that Brian and Nicole showed up. I don't know if they entered before me or I entered after them. I entered the house. What I recollect is that Brian Albert Jr. is sitting kind of at the island or in the island area, and I believe he was flanked by at least one female, possibly two, one on each side.
And
when you get into the house, who, if anyone, is there, or who, if anyone, is coming in with you? So, explanatory, I might have been there. This is a reduction in commitment, and it's not the word I believe, which is the word that he likes to use to generally reduce the commitment for the entire statement. This is a reduction of commitment in this statement. He says, I might have been there, which means he might not have been there. Well, it was about the same time that Brian and Nicole showed up. About the same time does not mean the same time. We got to keep all this in mind. I don't know. This is a missing time statement. I don't know. He's telling you that there's information in here that he doesn't know. If it's missing for him, now it's missing for you. I don't know if they entered before me or I entered after them. This is a straight up mistake on his part where he accidentally tells you the truth. So finally, we get at least one answer from a deception here, which is that he entered after they did. Then he says, I entered the house. Now, at least we have an I and we have an entered, as opposed to into the house. All we know at this point is that he did enter the house and that it was definitely after Brian and Nicole, but we have no indication of how long after them that he entered the house. He says, what I recollect, that's problematic. What I recollect is both deceptive and missing time. Deception by omission here is that Brian Albert Jr. is sitting kind of, again, we have a reduction in commitment, kind of at the island or in the island area. This is clearly fabricated because you can't see somebody as a general fog of not knowing whether they were here or there. This is a rehearsed statement that he doesn't want to get the details wrong. And I believe he was flanked by at least one female, possibly two, one on each side. This statement is so problematic. We start with a thought that was terminated, which is, so I might have been there. This indicates editing. I don't know here indicates missing time. There's an action here that was cut out. The misstated before me or after them indicates editing in combination with the missing time. It was about the same time that Brian and Nicole showed up. I don't know. He misstates this and says that he entered after Brian Albert and Nicole Albert. He's trying to say he doesn't know whether he entered before or after them in order to confuse the timeline, but he actually gives you the timeline straight. There's a missing time and then he enters the house. I entered the house does not give any indication of the time. It does not mean that he entered the house right behind them. Use of I recollect is again unnecessary here and indicates both deception and missing time and omitted action. Anything that is omitted is doubly important. So we definitely want to keep that in mind. So there's something, now we have two indicators of missing time. Anything that's missing is extremely, extremely important. Is sitting is present tense and indicates this is not coming from memory. Kind of at the island or in the island area is a rehearsed statement that is fabricated. Higgins wants this to sound credible while at the same time not committing to any facts that could be incorrect. So he's trying to give you a fabricated story that's plausible, but if somebody else who was there contradicts him in the future, the questioning is not going to come back to him and say, you said he was there. The statement of one, possibly two females is an attempt to confuse the timeline. One of the females left at one point. He should have seen two females if he entered the house right away. If he had gone in right behind Brian Albert, then he would have seen 2 females, but he only saw 1, which means he definitely entered the house after one of the females had already left. He tells you there was either 1 or 2. If you're trying to put the timeline together and you're thinking, well, one of them left, did he go into the house before that girl left or after that girl left? He doesn't allow you to create a timeline based on this statement, but it does allow us to create the timeline, because the only reason that he would confuse the timeline is if he came in substantially later. Otherwise, he would just say, I came in right behind him. If he wasn't involved in this, he would have said, yeah, I went in right behind Brian. There's 2 females sitting there, and Brian Albert Jr. was sitting at the island, and I went over there and gave him a noogie and told him happy birthday. There's a huge difference between what you're seeing here and what a truthful statement would look like. Okay, so when you do the plowing of the driveway and then parking, did you see Mr. Albert arrive at the house around that time? And then he needs more time. So when you answer a question with a question, straight up deception, especially in court when you can hear, when the person's right there and you can hear everything crystal clearly. He says, when I parked the Jeep, yeah, that's what he said. He says, yes. Well, yes. The question is completely answered at this point. Again, it's a yes or no question, and he says yes. Anything that we get now is extra information that is extremely important. So yeah, so I made the sweep, and as I could see the vehicle coming up, I made the sweep, got out of the way so he could park. Let's dissect this. The whole thing is unnecessary. We really need to understand this. We have an explanatory plus made the sweep. Making the sweep is a sensitive act that somehow ties back to the incident. Repeating I indicates deception here. As I could see the vehicle coming up. The vehicle was not coming up when he did the sweep. This indicates that the timeline is off here. I could see the vehicle coming up. So he's telling you that he did it at the time when Brian Albert was arriving, except he's not telling you that. He says, so I made the sweep, and as I could see the vehicle coming up, I made the sweep. He says it twice, which makes it rehearsed, it's deceptive, and now it becomes problematic. So lack of I when saying got out of the way means no commitment. Higgins seems to be lying about having to get out of the way, which indicates that the timeline is wrong here. We have just a ton of indicators that the timeline is wrong. He says, I made the sweep, got out of the way. So we're missing an I here. It means that this statement is not true. Then he says, explanatory plus so he could park equals Albert was not parking at this time. Got out of the way so he could park. All right, so what does all this mean? It's just deception everywhere. How do we put a puzzle together when all of the puzzles are negative pieces, right? Everything is deception. Believe it or not, you can put together a deception puzzle. And let's do that. Let's summarize here. There's a ton of deception around the action of sweeping the driveway. Higgins either swept the driveway long before Albert arrived because of the deception around Albert pulling up at that time. That means he either did it way before Albert arrived or he did it as he was leaving. If he swept the driveway before he left, that would be to get rid of evidence. That means something happened in the driveway and he was getting rid of evidence there. If he says that he swept it before and he tries to really confuse the timeline, then people, which is exactly what happened in court, just assume that he swept it beforehand, not after. How does this all fit together? Well, if he came out of the house afterward, and let's say that he did murder John O'Keefe. John O'Keefe wasn't dead at this point, but let's say that he did assault him. So Higgins is coming out and there's some evidence in the driveway. Most likely what would probably have happened is Brian Albert would have gotten into his vehicle and pulled out of the driveway and backed a little bit out so that Higgins could go in and sweep the driveway, get rid of if there was blood in there or if something happened that somehow got evidence out into the driveway area, Higgins would need to sweep that. And then in his mind, he would have a partial memory of seeing Brian Albert in his vehicle, his headlights, and that would initiate that story of, oh, I didn't want to get blocked in. He was waiting to park in the driveway. I did a quick sweep and he pulled in. He just moved that from after the incident to before the incident so that it doesn't look like it's covering up evidence. But the fact that it's moved means that it is definitely covering up evidence. Let's see if we get any more indicators of this. Okay, he had parked in the driveway around the time that you were parking on the street, yes. And so when you come to the house and you see the people, where were they situated within the house? He says, so I came through what I would call like the breezeway door. So there's a front door to the residence, there's the garages, and in between there is a breezeway door. We are already 4 lines into this, and we haven't talked about where people are situated in the house. So we have a bunch of problems here. We have 2 explanatory statements. And then he says, I came in what I would call like a breezeway door, but then he says breezeway door again, which means this is likely to be sensitive to him, which means it's deceptive. There's a front door to the residence. There's garages. This over explaining means that there's a big lie coming up and he's having a hard time getting to it. And in between there is a breezeway door. I came in through there. So he does not say, he says breezeway door twice, but he doesn't say that he came in through the breezeway door. What he says is, I came in through there. And it's kind of like you're in the kitchen. He does not say that I came in through the breezeway door and was in the kitchen. But that's what he's insinuating, but that's not what he says. And the fact that he's trying to make you think that's what he's saying, but he's not saying it, means that that's not true. And this is a big fat lie right here. And you're in the island, so to speak. You may be able to sit at it. And then he says, and he was, Brian Albert Jr. was right there. And again, flanked by 1, if not 2 females. He thought about this beforehand, the 1 or 2, to confuse the timeline. He wanted to make sure that he says that, but now he said it in 2 different questions. And then he's stumbling all over the people who were there. This time when he's trying to say who was there and who wasn't, he becomes very choppy, which is a huge indicator of deception. Brian Albert Jr. was right there, and again, flanked by 1, if not 2 females. Now, at some point after your arrival, is anyone else that you were familiar with came by the house? I believe it was Jen and Matt McCabe. You know about how long it was after you arrived that they arrived? No. Okay, this is important. I'm going to tell you right here. When you have a bunch of missing time, this is the time of the crime. Let's analyze this carefully. No, I don't know. He's telling you right off the bat, I don't know. When he tells you there's something that he doesn't know, it means that there's information that he's not telling you. I don't know, approximately. That is another indicator of missing time. I don't think there's a reduction in commitment. So we have indicators of missing time and reduced commitment. It was much longer. That is another missing time statement. People started. That's another missing time statement. Flowed in at that point. Higgins is again making it impossible to tie him down to any sort of specific time or timeline. There are 3 indicators in this answer of missing time. There is extremely important information that is being withheld or edited out of this story. In murder cases, this style of inserting missing time around the time of the murder is almost a certain indicator that the person making the statement was involved in the murder, and it happened in this time frame that he is skirting around. And beyond the sort of kitchen area that you were describing before, where else did you go within the house that night? At one point, that's another missing time statement. At one point means there's a lot of points that he's not telling you. Briefly, Brian Albert showed me some photographs. Family, I believe. If he showed him photographs and he doesn't know if it was family, primarily it might have been of his son, who had recently been in the Marine Corps, This is a rehearsed statement. Higgins is not very good at rehearsed statements. He doesn't memorize them exactly, and then he tries to improvise. When he improvises, he begins to reduce commitment to that statement. So his rehearsed statements come across as both rehearsed and deceptive. Then Higgins does not say that he didn't go anywhere else in the house. And beyond yourself and Mr. Albert, was there anyone else from the group that you described as coming into the room at the time, Mr. Albert? And he says, I don't think so. I don't think so is hugely, hugely problematic here, because if it's just 2 people in a room for what he described as a moment, so maybe 1 minute, and he doesn't know if a 3rd person walked in, that means that this is not coming from memory. This is completely fabricated. This is a cover story. I don't think so. I think Nicole may have popped in for a second, but I'm not 100% positive on that. What he's telling you is, I rehearsed this with Brian Albert. Brian Albert told me what to say, and I can't remember what to say. Because he says that Nicole Albert may have popped in, the reason why he inserted that is because she was part of that conversation. There was, at some point, Higgins, Brian Albert, and Nicole Albert were together having a conversation about this. And Brian Albert told Higgins, when we have to talk about this, we're going to say that you and I went into this room to look at a photograph of my son because he went into the Marine Corps. And I was showing you this photograph. Higgins can't remember here whether Albert is going to say that Nicole was there or not. Now Higgins feels compelled to say it was just us, but Nicole may have popped in there. That way, if Albert later says on the stand that Nicole came in or Nicole was there, then Higgins can say, yeah, I wasn't sure, but yeah, I thought she might have popped in. All of this reduction of commitment here is so that he can't get pinned down, but that does tell us a big chunk of what happened here. Higgins stated that he was only in the room for a moment and that he can't remember if a third person entered the room with them. The statement doesn't make sense on its face. Two people in a small room aren't going to know if a third person goes in. Nicole was part of this conversation, and Higgins wasn't sure if Albert was going to say that she was in the room or not. The rehearsed statement was that Nicole wasn't in the room, but that seems like such a big lie that Higgins finds it impossible not to mitigate the deception. Do you know approximately what time you left the house on Fairview that evening? I guesstimate, so this is a reduction of commitment. It was anywhere between 12:30 and 1, but I'm not 100% positive. So that means it was either between 12:30 and 1, or it might not have been. But he gives us zero information here. The intense lack of commitment means that he could have left any time, or that there was a time difference from the time that he left the party, left the house, and drove away from the house. See, he created a range here, which could be used to cover himself if somebody inside the house said he left at, let's say, 12:30. But then his phone record indicates that he left at 1. My guess is that he probably left the party to go talk to Brian Albert for 20 minutes, left Brian Albert, went outside, took 10 minutes with Brian Albert to sweep the driveway, and he ended up probably leaving the house about half an hour after he left the party. So based on the testimony that's going to come out from witnesses, he feels like if he says somewhere between 12:30 and 1, then it's going to cover all his bases between what time people are going to say he left and what time his phone record is going to say he left. So he's trying to cover his bases. Now we get, so a relatively short period of time. Is that correct? It was a short period of time. I knew kind of from the onset when I got there, it probably wasn't going to be a long time because I'm not a beer drinker. And that's what they had. So I was probably one of the first people to leave. Okay, repeating it was is deceptive here. It means that he's trying to stall and fabricate. So it was a short period of time. Okay, let's follow this here. Wasn't going to be a long time. That's a negative statement. Because is an explanatory statement. I'm not a beer drinker is a negative statement. And that's what they had. So is another explanatory statement, followed by the verb to leave. What we have is a negative plus a explanatory statement plus a negative plus an explanatory statement, followed by the word to leave during a time when Higgins was not late to go anywhere. He wasn't late to go home to his house. And in fact, he wasn't even in a rush to go home because he went to the police station first. We have leave used in the term that there is huge conflict upon when he's leaving, followed by this massive indicator of a lie. The cause of the duress is that leaving was included in this answer where it wasn't previously. We learned from the missing time answer that Higgins had a direct role in O'Keefe's murder, but the panic of covering it up didn't set in until he had to leave. O'Keefe was still alive at this point, and Higgins couldn't be sure when he left that Albert would actually finish the job. Thus, you see the duress at the point that he leaves the house. All of this just came out from a real simple question, but because he talks about leaving, that was a very emotional time for Higgins, because whatever happened, is this going to get covered up? Is Albert going to do what he needs to do? Is Albert just going to tell the police when the police get there? Higgins did it, so he doesn't know. These are all unknowns in his mind, and he has to take a leap of faith here and just trust that Albert is going to commit murder to help him out here. So that would be why you have this massive indicator of duress in this statement here. Now, for that entirety of the time that you were there, did you go anywhere else within the home beyond what you've described so far as the kitchen and the living room area? It says no. Higgins has lied using no in the past, so this verbiage can't be nailed down to either being truthful or deceptive. It's meaningless. Did you go upstairs at any time? No, that doesn't help us at all. Did you go downstairs in any sort of basement area at the time? No. And when you were in the kitchen area, how were you positioned in relation to the window facing the front of the house? All right, so we know that repeating words are deceptive, so let's see, does he repeat anything here? So I would have had, so we have an explanatory statement followed by would have, which means he is fabricating this because he's not pulling it from memory. He wouldn't say would, it's just pulling it from memory. Would have had my back to that area, my back to the door that I came in. I just wrote well.
And when you were in the kitchen area, do you recall sort of how you were positioned in relation to the windows facing the front of the house?
So I would have had my back to that area, my back to the door that I came in.
I just wrote, well, that's a lie. And specifically with reference to Mr. O'Keefe and Miss Reed, at any point did you see either of them inside the house or outside of the house or around the house or anywhere around Fairview Road? And he says, absolutely not. And we know, actually, there's been 3 different statements now, 3 different people that use the word absolutely. and it's always a lie when they use it. Absolutely is used incorrectly here. It's been a lie when they use it. So there is a correct way that you can use the word absolutely, which is if the question states, would you? And that happens more often than you think. Actually, if there's a bunch of questions, even if in here that say, would you do this? And absolutely means regardless of the circumstances, I would not do that, or I would do that. Absolutely means regardless of the circumstances, my answer will hold. When they say, did you see him? That is not a hypothetical question. So absolutely is the wrong answer here. It's used incorrectly. It's used to overemphasize. So it's very similar to uncontracting words. You're overemphasizing something. And that's a sign of deception. So the word absolutely, when it's misused, is a sign of deception. That means that they absolutely did. And at any point in time over the course of the evening, what, if any, communication or text did you send to either of those two people while you were at the house? While I was at the house, I think I shot a text to John. Where are you? I think that's what it was. Technically, this is 5 eyes plus reduction of commitment. This is massively deceptive. We know that he did send a text because the statement is factual. Where's all of this deception coming from? It's the motive for sending the text. 20 minutes after the fatal blow to the head, when they had time to talk about this and figure out what they were going to do, he decided, oh, it'd be a really good idea to send a text message, where are you? So that after that happened, it looks like he still hasn't shown up. Okay, deception by omission, not facts. This duress is indicative that the text message was sent to cover up the incident. After he had had a chance to talk to Albert about covering it up, this text would serve as a bookend, meaning that the assault that led to O'Keefe's death couldn't have happened after the text message and likely happened 15 to 20 minutes after the assault. So I can't remember what time that message was sent, but the assault could not have happened after that message because that message was sent to cover up the assault. So we know in here that we can go look up the time of that text and that the entire incident had been over for, and I say 15, 20 minutes, I'm guessing at that point. But once something like that happens, there's going to be a moment of, oh my God, like what just happened here? Are we really in the middle of this situation? Before this turned fatal, it was a fight. And a fight, people can get up and walk away from. And the next morning say, man, I'm sorry, let me buy you a beer. Like, whatever. We go on with our lives. Once you realize you're in a situation where somebody's going to die, it takes a moment to stop and say, what the hell is going on? We need to figure this out. And time goes by faster than you think it does at that point. You're trying to figure out, you're trying to come to grips, and you're trying to say, oh my God, what evidence is here? What can we do here? Probably by the time Higgins was clear enough to send that text message, in my opinion, I'm guesstimating, probably somewhere around 15 to 20 minutes after the assault. Could have been 30 seconds after the assault for all I know, but most likely it's going to take a minute after for them to start to plan and then start to execute their plan to cover it up. But after you left the waterfall, at any point in time, did you speak to, text with, or communicate in any way, shape, or form, or see in any way, shape, or form either Mr. O'Keefe or Miss Reed? Okay, don't look at the screen. Just kidding. So this is objective. You don't have to be a trained deception detection person like me to pull the deception out of here. This is an objective statement. You can just look at this statement and know with 100% certainty that Higgins was involved in this and all of the implications that follow that. If Higgins was involved, that means Karen Reed didn't hit him. So why is this so objective? Why is this so clear cut? Well, you see
the waterfall, at any point in time, did you speak to, text with, or communicate in any way, shape, or form, or see in any way, shape, or form either Mr. O'Keefe or Miss Reed?
Well, again, the only person I shot the text to while I was at the house was John, but after I left the waterfall, I never saw John O'Keefe or the defendant again.
Well, you see the word never. Now, the word never to me is very decisive, but to you, the word never might still be a bit of a question mark in your mind. Let's look at this. Well, again, the only person I shot the text to while I was at the house was John. There's going to be a change of language right around that bookends the murder, and it's going to either be the murder weapon or the name that he's called. So we have John, but after I left the waterfall, I never saw John O'Keefe or the defendant again. That was a huge slip up on his part because he says, I never saw the defendant is Karen Reed. So he's sitting in court looking at the defendant saying, I never saw Karen Reed again. When you say never, that means past, present, and future. That's why it's so deceptive. It's mind-blowing here. I hope you're having the same reaction when you see this as I did. Higgins is sitting there testifying in court. He literally says, I never saw Karen Reed again after that moment. And while you're probably thinking, well, I know what he meant. He meant he didn't see her again that night. I never saw her again. He meant that night. That's not what he said. You can only go by what people actually say. If he didn't say it, it didn't happen. If he did say it, it did happen. He says, I never saw John O'Keefe or the defendant again. We know with absolute certainty that when he says, I never saw the defendant again, that means that he did see the defendant again, because he's looking at her at the time that he says this. This isn't even the next line or the next question. This is the same question. This is in the same context. He says, I never saw John O'Keefe again. I never saw the defendant again. And because we know with certainty that he did see Karen Reed again, we also know with 100% certainty that he did see John O'Keefe again, because you can't use literally the same word. It's not like he even used the word never twice. It's the same word. This word never here, he used it to describe both Karen Reed and John O'Keefe, which means it's either true for both or it's true for neither. It can't be true for one and not true for the other. We know that it was not true for the defendant, so we know that it was not true for John O'Keefe. At this point, we know with 100% certainty that Higgins was in fact involved in his death. And so we're going to stop right here because he gets asked a million questions and we're not through the direct yet, but this video's way longer than I want it to be, but we at least answered the question. We started this video with a question. We wanted to know, did Higgins murder John O'Keefe? What we did not answer is, what did he do? Did he give that final blow? We didn't answer that here. The only thing that we did actually definitively answer is that Higgins was there. And if you like this, then please like and subscribe. Higgins, man, there's so much information. I'll make the videos as condensed as I can, but yeah, whatever. As long as we get all the information out there in the end, that's all that really matters. So keep seeking the truth for yourself. Hope you enjoy this. This is Truth Revealed signing off.